Hello everyone, welcome to our Q&A panel session today on the UK coach market. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Lauren Hogg and I'm the Assistant Market Development Manager for the UK at VisitScotland. We'll maybe just give it another 30 seconds or so just to let a few more people join the session and then we'll get started. Just a couple of housekeeping points first of all before we begin. The session is being recorded for the benefit of those who have registered but can't attend today, so it will be shared with them directly by email after the session. You are all automatically muted with your cameras off. However, if we have time at the end of the session, we would love to take some questions from the audience for the panel. So you'll see in the control panel for the webinar, you've got a question box. Please submit your questions there. And then I'll select a few at the end to pose to the panelists on your behalf. So any questions at all, please just let us know and I'll get round as many of them as I can. Okay, looks like we're at some good numbers now, so I'll just crack on. I'll get started by setting the scene for the domestic market. So it is Scotland's largest visitor market, with 80% of all overnight visits in 2019 being made by Great Britain residents. And this totaled 3.2 billion in spend from those visitors. So a very, very chunky market. Even closer to home, when we look at the Scots, Scots visitors took 7.7 million overnight trips and spent £1.4 billion for their overnight visits. And then even when we look at the day trip visits only, that contributed 5.8 billion in spend to Scotland's economy in 2019, and 77% of that were the Scots residents themselves. When we look at the domestic coach market in particular, it contributed a spend of £83 million between 2014 and 16. So it is an incredibly valuable sector and supports around 270,000 jobs across the UK. Coach visitors tend to be amongst the older age groups, so this means that they can travel year-round if they're retired, and they are reliable visitors who make repeat visits. Research is also showing that at this point in the pandemic, their travel confidence is very high thanks to their vaccinations, and operators are reporting strong demand for domestic breaks with high numbers of brochure requests, booking requests, and phones ringing off the hook. So it's never been a better time to prioritise this market as part of your business. Finally, before we get started, thank you to our partners at the Coach Tourism Association for their support with this webinar. And by way of an update from them, they've just launched their new consumer-focused marketing campaign under the We Love Coaches brand. So they're concentrating on social media for this campaign, and they would love if you would share your pictures of your coach visitors arriving at your business using the hashtag #WeLoveCoaches. So they'd love to see those visitors arriving throughout the rest of the year. So please do share on social. We have had some changes to the panel for today, as sadly Caroline from Peebles Hydro has been pulled away on urgent hotel business, and Kevin Main has also been pulled away urgently to drive one of his coaches. So we're very happy to welcome Martin McPhail, who's Chair of CPT Scotland and Director of McPhail's Coaches, in his place. Ian Fox from CalMac was also due to join us, but we're hoping that Neil Hunter from CalMac will be able to join momentarily. So looking forward to seeing Neil later on in the webinar. So I thought we would get started with some introductions just so the panel can introduce themselves to you first. So Martin, as I just mentioned you, would you like to go first?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Martin McPhail. As Lauren said, I'm the Managing Director at McPhail's Coaches and the current Chair for CPT in Scotland. I'm standing in for Kevin Main today. My business has been in operation since 1947 and has been focused on the tourism market for a great number of those, both working on incoming and the domestic customers for extended breaks, as well as providing day excursions as well in the UK.
Great, thanks Martin. Robert Shaw, would you like to go next?
Good morning, I'm Robert Shaw, Director of Coventry-based Harry Shaw Coaches. We've been operating coach tours to Scotland now for over 40 years. It's always been a mainstay of our product range. and we've always had great success with it. Apart from that, we operate a wide range of tours around the UK and in former days across to Europe, but of course that's a bit challenging at the moment. I'm also chair of the Coach Tourism Association, which represents over 300 operators and suppliers. We act as a conduit in the industry so that everybody can get together, talk, mention their problems, discuss things. We are a great source of information. Our website is free to use, anybody can log on to it. It's there to tell everybody what's going on in the industry. And we finally got our website, welovecoaches.com, which lists every operator in the UK that's a member so that anybody can find it and get the details and hire coaches from us or look at our tour programs. So yeah, if you're not a member, think about it.
Thanks, Robert. Good plug there. Moving on to our other Robert Ramsey.
Hi there, good morning everyone. My name is Robert Ramsey and I am a contract manager for the Albatross Travel Group. Albatross are the leading UK wholesaler to the coach market, and even though their offices are based in England and Kent, I actually live and work remotely in Perthshire in Scotland.
Great, thanks Rob. And last but not least, Peter.
Hello, I'm Peter from the National Trust for Scotland. We're primarily a conservation charity, but from your point of view, we're best seen as a collection of dozens of visitor attractions, such as Culloden Battlefield and Bannockburn, Glencoe, Inverview Garden, and just a whole clatter of castles. I personally run the Travel Trade one-stop shop in the Travel Trade and Hospitality department. That's traveltrade@nts.org.uk. The idea being that you email that and you can book any of our properties, get itineraries, discount rates, and more.
Great, thanks, Peter. So yes, let's crack on with the questions. I've got a few juicy ones for you, so get ready. Robert Shaw, let's start with you first of all. What demand have you seen from your customers for Scotland, and would you say this is consistent across the other operator members in the Coach Tourism Association?
As I intimated earlier, demand for Scotland currently is very high. You know, we're getting record numbers of phone calls, brochure requests, inquiries, etc., etc. The old traditional favourites are still there, like Loch Lomond, Oban, Fort William, and touring holidays are proving to be popular as well, because we can operate itineraries which is very difficult to do with your own car, very expensive, and it's, let's face it, hard work as well, driving a car around when you can be chauffeured on board one of our luxury coaches. So yeah, the other thing to think about, of course, is that there is little chance of seeing some European alpine scenery this year. So people really are sort of returning to Scotland in big numbers because it's a great touring destination. The scenery is pretty similar. I think mountains around the world look pretty similar to me anyway. So yeah, it's there. And of course, you've got the traditional Scottish hospitality, which people always look forward to. You've got a sensational product range. You've got the whiskey tasting experiences. You've got all this kind of thing, which is absolutely unique to the country, isn't it? So yeah, I'm a big believer that Scotland's going to be bigger than ever this year. And of course, hopefully there are going to be some more beds available because our European friends are not visiting. So, you know, there are opportunities for coach operators because many cities which the price point's been completely out of reach of the domestic market suddenly want our business. So, you know, if there's any operators out there, think about that. You can go to Edinburgh again. I mean, we haven't been able to get into Edinburgh for a long time. You know, sometimes we're basing clients in Newcastle on Tyne so they get to Edinburgh. So, you know, these are just points that you can think about. You've got to try and draw the positives out of the problems, haven't you? And I think that is a definite positive. The fact that you can use all this and you can build programs again. And that just one plea to the hoteliers, you know, just remember your friends in the future. You know, when times do return to normal, and they will, just remember the people that were trying hard to bring you business when nobody else was. But anyway, that's my message for today, Lauren. Crack on.
Thank you. And have you heard any of your other operator members in the CTA? Is it all the same thing? Do you think demand for Scotland is high across the board from across England?
Yes, it is. I think depending on where you are in the country, depends on the type of programme that people are buying. I mean, obviously, the closer you are to Scotland, you can operate short durations. You can do 3 nights as opposed to 4 and 5 night breaks. You can do different things, and certain things appeal in certain parts of the country as well. You know, there's a lot of strength in the very south of England because they have to do overnights on the way up. It increases the price point for it. So yeah, it makes it a different product altogether. You have to upgrade tours to southern Scotland, not to northern Scotland. So there's things like this that all come into play depending on where you're picking up. And of course, many of our operators have nationwide pickups. So they have to think about that as well to build a coach to a decent size, to get the passenger numbers up. They have to do a lot of pickups. So all these things come into play for coach operators. But generally, across the board, demand is up, and I hope it will continue.
Great, thanks. And Robert Ramsey, similarly, what would you say are your top sellers from a wholesaler point of view? And what do you like to include in those packages that you know will always go down well with the coach operators you're selling to?
It's hard to say what the top sellers are because the business is actually spread quite evenly around Scotland. I'd say the fastest sellers are anything on the Scottish Islands, the West Coast, as Robert alluded to earlier on, the tattoo. But that doesn't really help you if you're not located on an island or the West Coast or the Central Belt of Scotland in August. That doesn't really help you. But the good news is that it actually is over the course of the year, it's quite evenly spread throughout Scotland. There's actually quite a lot of opportunity for the lesser known areas as well, I've found. With the correct promotion and marketing and such like, even the lesser known areas, the less desirable areas of Scotland can actually become quite high demand. You know, we find that in the last couple of years with Dundee and Stranraer, places like that, you know. So there's quite a few opportunities there, regardless of where you're situated in Scotland, I think. What was the second part of your question is what would we like including?
Yeah, is there anything, you know, say for example, like, you know, a whiskey tasting will always go down well, so it's usually something that you like to include. Is there any similar like types of attractions or experiences that you know are usually big hits with the groups?
I think that's a two-part really, but I mean for the hotels, definitely sort of welcome drinks, particularly as Robert alluded to. You know, if the guests are coming from far afield, from the south of England, you know, they'll want a welcome when they arrive at the hotel. A more individual dining experience, so things, you know, sitting on smaller tables of 2s and 4s and things like that in the main restaurant, rather than the round tables of 8 and 10 in the function room. That smacks of like, you know, groups from a bygone age. Afternoon teas, cream teas, entertainment packages, things like that. I think from a visitor attraction point of view, the most popular visitor attractions for coach guests are things like steam heritage trains, cruises, castles and gardens. Those are the old favourites. But I'm very keen on unique experiences as well. So things like farmyard visits, private tours of historic houses and castles. I mean, Peterhead Prison Museum, the Scottish Cranach Centre, things like that. Those are experiences that appeared in our itineraries recently. I think at the end of the day, the guests are on holiday. You know, they want a memorable experience that they can talk about to their friends or family when they go home. And you know, if you offer something a little bit more unique, that's definitely going to be the case.
Yeah.
And
we all know word of mouth. Sorry, Robert. We all know word of mouth is the biggest influencer these days. So yeah, topical experiences definitely go a long way.
One last thing, just when we're talking about the top sellers, I actually think what Albatross are finding that the fastest growing aspect of our business is actually the winter, which is often overlooked. I mean, winter for Albatross is any time between November and March sort of period. And once again, there's two aspects of that. I think the onus really falls on the hoteliers during that period. I think if you're a hotelier and you're thinking you're going to offer a standard dinner, bed and breakfast at just a slightly cheaper rate than your summer, that offer is going to get lost. It's going to get forgotten because there's so many other hotels competing with turkey and tensols, drinks packages, entertainment packages and things like that. You need to package your offering up for it to be attractive to the coach industry. For the attractions, for visitor attractions, it's really just a case of being open, to be honest. You know, there's so many visitor attractions that decide to close the doors at the end of the summer, at the end of October. if you're open during the winter, there will be a desire. Although there's a few attractions that are doing festive things over the December period, like historic houses are decking themselves out in festive decorations. Steam trains are doing like mince pie specials and things like that. That's very popular. We can actually package up a holiday around that. People go to the borders to visit Holyrood House and decked out at Christmas.
Great, all great stuff. Thanks, Rob. And question for you next, Martin. Just more on the kind of operational side of things, from a coach operator perspective. What COVID safety measures have you put in place on your coaches, both to protect the clients on the coaches and the staff and the visitors at the locations that you're visiting?
Sure, yeah. Well, our first priority has to be the staff. So without them being safe and secure, we can't really then extend that towards our customers and any customer that's visiting an attraction. So staff are now both temperature and lateral flow tested on a regular basis, as well as providing them with significant PPE now, which is either face coverings, face shields. The vehicles themselves have hand sanitized stations within them. And they're also screens fitted behind the driving area, which is a twofold thing. It is there to protect the driver and the passengers from each other, and it also helps, which we'll go into later, with the capacity issue, because those seats then become available to use. In addition to those measures, the principles that we've got in place to support those customer areas, naturally, they'll support the staff as well. Our coaches have all been upgraded with, it's a buzzword in the coach industry just now, we're all using these air purification systems. They're there as an aside to the current air conditioning unit. Now, the providers of these claim that they can eradicate up to 99.7% of any virus transmission, which would include, if we take COVID out of the equation for a second, norovirus would be a thing that would be a regular transmittable issue on a coach from time to time. So these will help us not only for the COVID situation, but for any other issues that may be out there. With tourism business, it's much easier to limit transmission than it is on a service bus. So when we're visiting attractions, when we're coming to a hotel, we can safely say that those vehicles or those seats on the vehicles are one-time users. The vehicles themselves are fog sanitised either the night before or a period of time prior to that passenger boarding the coach. Face masks are still being worn. I think it's well documented that the seat backs are a form of mitigation as well. So there's a wealth of mitigation in place. In Scotland, obviously we have legislative law that means that we can't dip below 1 metre, whereas our friends on the other side of the border, they have guidance where they can do their own risk assessments upon that.
And what were you saying there on capacity? The screens helping with capacity? Well,
we've got the screens separating the driver's cab area and the passenger area. Now that, as I said, it stops the potential for transmission. The driver generally is dipped below the passenger area. But as I said, it also gives us that opportunity to increase capacity. Capacity is the big thing right now for us. We can't get the full coaches right now, but what we can do is we can start to influence confidence, because confidence is going to be one of the biggest factors moving forward. And most of us are quite delighted to be doing something, having spent a year doing very much nothing. And we're accepting of the fact that we will have to limit capacity to ensure customers gain that confidence. From our own day tour market, a lot of the calls that come in, people will say, oh look, I'm just desperate to get out of the house, I'm fed up looking at these four walls. That's caveated by, what safety measures have you got in place for me while I'm on your coach? So capacity reduction in the short term, yeah, it's there. Obviously in Scotland we hope that we'll follow on to a guidance, and actually from a UK perspective, we're actually hoping that naturally as time goes forward, we will be able to increase the capacity to a much more marketable level.
Yeah. Well, I don't know who wouldn't be reassured by that. That's definitely going above and beyond for safety. Similar question for you, Robert Shaw. I know that the CTA work very closely with the CPT, both north of the border and south of the border. So could you tell us how CTA have been working with these bodies to communicate COVID safety measures to all your operator and supplier members?
First of all, thanks for that, Martin. I think that's a very good insight into all the problems and that operators are facing and how we're dealing with it. I mean, at CTA, we're engaging with governments on a regular basis with the various departments. Obviously, there's some conflict between what one department says and what another department says, which is confusing for our organisation. So how operators deal with it, we're not quite sure, really. I think the key difference between the devolved governments is legislation. I mean, in Scotland, I understand from Martin, it's actually law that certain things are implemented. In the UK, it's guidance. In England, it's guidance, and you know, we have to carry out our own risk assessments, which actually provide another guarantee to customers that things are as safe as we can possibly make them. So yeah, it's really about that. We're getting as much information as we can from the devolved governments and placing it onto our website. And I'll recommend that if anybody wants to, they just log on to the Coach Tourism Association website. All the information's there from the various devolved governments. We've even got something there, dare I say it, from Ireland now. So I know we're not supposed to mention that, Lauren, but you know, it's there. But I mean, the Scottish information is there as well, dare I say it. And I know it's a minefield for most people, but I think they are finding their way around it. And the longer this goes on, the more we're getting used to it. And I think customers are quite happy to trust us now. You know, that initially there was a lot of fear, dare I say, about getting on board a coach. But that seems to be going as more and more people get vaccinated as well. And I think, you know, it's becoming less important than perhaps it used to be. But as I say to everybody, none of these things are important until something happens. So, you know, that's when suddenly all these procedures, etc., that seem to be a little bit onerous and perhaps even irrelevant, they'll suddenly become massively important if the no-win, no-fee solicitors get involved with it. So it's time really to be very conscious of that and to be conscious of the consequences of not carrying out the assessments properly, etc., etc. So that's all I can say to everybody, really. Just take care, but there is a way around it. And as Martin said, it's great to be operating something again, even though it's not what we want to be doing. Perhaps it's great to be operating. So, you know, thanks to everybody for having confidence in the coach market to carry on, really.
Yeah, fabulous. And yeah, just to welcome Ian Fox, going by his new alias Neil Hunter, but welcome Ian Fox from Calmac. Glad to be able to see him. Thank you. I've got a question for you next, but would you like to introduce yourself first? Just tell the audience a bit about what you do at Calmac.
Yeah, I look after all the coach and heavy haulage business for my Sims, and basically one of the biggest problems that we've got is capacity. It's deck allocation, and our head of a team of guys that basically, if somebody doesn't show up, then basically they'll challenge them, because to be honest, it's only good manners to phone up the company to say you're not going to make it, and we are hot on controlling that.
Yep, that's actually my question for you. So would you be able to go into a bit of detail about the changes to a coach visitor's experience on the ferry now in a time of COVID compared to before? So what restrictions have you got in place, and how does that impact a coach visitor?
Okay, depending on the size of the vessel, that is going to determine the number of passengers that we can take. In normal times, the likes of the Caledonian Isles on Nadross and Brodick can take 1,000 passengers without restriction, and the Isle of Mull on Oban Craignure can take 962 without restriction. The problem is that we are required to comply with social distancing regulations that are being applied by Scottish Government. So that's why we have a restriction on the number of passengers that we can take. In the case of Oban Craignure on the Isle of Mull, it's 25 passengers. and on the Caledonian Isles, it's 35 passengers.
Good. And obviously, as you said, you've got different business streams to manage. You've got your coach visitors, your FIT visitors, but then you've also got your freight and your and the residents of the islands as well. So how have you found managing COVID capacity with those different streams as well?
That's a fine balance from the point of view that we can't, as part of the CalMac Charter, because we're a public-owned company, we can't discriminate one group from the other. No one group of customers has priority over anybody else. So we basically have to apply everything as evenly as possible, which isn't always easy.
Yeah, absolutely. Peter, I've got a question for you now along similar lines. Would you be able to share how a coach visitor's experiences differs now in COVID times and what you've done to put that into place at the visitor attractions?
Absolutely. Well, we've got a bit of a high-class problem at the Trust in that we've got so many different properties that resulted in a lot of different procedures. I'll try to theme them to kind of give you an idea of the way we're thinking, because each property is different, requires a different approach, right? A bit like Neil and his different vessels. The easiest would probably be gardens and sites of natural heritage. Got wide open spaces, easy to do social distancing there. We pretty much tended to close down the indoor spaces in these kind of visitor attractions to focus on the garden and put a one-way system in place. And with kind of people with mobility challenges in mind, we've kind of created, I call them slip roads, or little shortcuts along the one-way space so you can kind of merge with traffic coming the other direction. So gardens are easy. Where it gets complicated is indoor spaces. And for us, that's kind of split into sort of visitor centres, which are kind of modern and a bit easier, and the castles, which were designed before people even knew about germ theory, let alone social distancing and hand sanitisation. So for example, Culloden is kind of that's the kind of modern visitor centre. It's quite easy. We would split a large group up into small subgroups, let these small groups in 5-minute intervals. One-way system, max is worn. We ask that they keep 2 battle swords distance. That's 2 meters distance, but we find by referring it as 2 battle swords distance, we keep it fun, thereby increasing social distancing and reducing the number of sword fights on our property. So Culloden's quite easy because of that. Where it gets tricky would be the castles, because you have a lot of up and down, narrow corridors, some kind of crisscrossing, which again is easy to kind of back in the day for sword fighting and so on, but it's hard to maintain this distance. And it really varies from property to property based on their staff and their own experience, what we can do there. So for example, a great example would be Crathis in the northeast. We realized that even if we're letting people in at 5 to 10 minute intervals, it was just taking too long to easily bring a large group of, say, 40 domestic passengers through. So we set up a system where if you want to go on a particular day, we say, that's fine. Can you maybe come at 9 o'clock before the castle is open? We'll open up just for your group. You'll have it on exclusive use for an hour and a half. And that means we can get you through safely all at once. And so we're kind of pitching it a bit like what Robert Shaw was saying earlier about the positive sides of the pandemic, if such a thing exists. And in this way, we're kind of offering, just for the same price, an exclusive opening experience, but you may have to shift your itinerary around. Fortunately, we can't do that at all our sites. I know Coros and Falkland, for instance, have been closed, but those guys have great garden experiences as well. So it's just, that becomes a garden experience at a reduced price. And we're also finding a little bit of, the final thing would be a little bit of a grey area in, for example, some of our island landings. For a while, we were kind of thinking, well, some of our islands are uninhabited. So does the kind of legislation on domestic cruises apply to that? At the moment, we're kind of leaning towards, well, it probably does, because even though they're uninhabited islands, if there's tourists come to and through, you're going to get a nexus, kind of a lot of transmission anyway. So it's really to say it's all a lot of juggling and trying to do your best on an ad hoc basis.
No, great. I mean, definitely a challenge on your hands, but sounds like you've had some really positive learnings out of that as you've been making your way through. So yeah, great visitor experience in my mind. And I thought we'd pick out like a really good example of a positive experience just to like put it into a real life context. So Martin, I thought I'd ask you, could you tell us a time about when a supplier went above and beyond to welcome one of your groups and why it was so great, what they did to make that experience so special?
I mean, and it's a very recent one actually, which is probably quite salient in the times that we're in. were at Inverurie Gardens very recently. So prior to the trip itself, we called in we called in advance, and they couldn't have been any more helpful or informative on how they were going to accept the group. Delighted to be able to welcome us. Very well organised coach parties. They were delighted to welcome, and that was a wee bit of a shift, because of late, anytime you phone up anywhere to suggest you'd like to bring a party along, you can feel the barriers coming up and the heckles at the end of the call. So Inverurie were great. 2 days before we arrived, they actually called us again just to check on the numbers, make sure we were comfortable and happy to be coming along. And then on the day itself, now again, it was only a party of 20 that came along, but on the day itself, because we had that clear line of communication, and we knew how to communicate that to our passengers, the passengers were then informed by the time they came off. They were well greeted and well represented by Inverurie at the visit itself. It meant that when we left, we had 20 very happy punters back on the coach, heading back to their hotel, ready to talk about a good day out on the coach, in the attraction, and happy people. So that would be quite an important thing to take forward just now, that those lines of communication between attractions or hotels and the coach company themselves can harvest that kind of end product, that end result.
Yeah, that's a great example, and not one we prepared earlier in a Blue Peter fashion, just for the audience.
Just to charm me.
a little pat on the back for you there, Peter. And Robert Shaw, I thought I'd ask the same question to you. Is there any experience that really stands out from a Scottish attraction or hotel that really went above and beyond for one of your groups?
Oh yeah, we've got a long-standing hotel partner in Loch Lomond, and you know, when the clients get off the coach, they're greeted by the manager by their personal names. I mean, everything in hotels is about attention to detail. I think it doesn't have to cost anything. Just by mentioning somebody's name to them makes them feel special. So they get off the coach and they talk to them. Oh yes, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, yeah, and it just makes people feel welcome. It's just part of it. And then every time they come down for dinner or breakfast, or, good morning, Mrs. Smith, how are you? Have you had a good day? Things like this. It's just mentioning people's names. I know I'm teaching hoteliers to suck eggs because they've probably been trained beyond to do it. But it's just getting your staff to buy into it, isn't it, really? And I think the hotels have got a challenge this year with finding staff. I've been reading about that. But even if you have got sort of new members of staff, etc., I think enthusiasm from the top can actually, it's infectious, isn't it? It makes me infectious. It makes me don't want to use that word at the moment, infectious, do I? But enthusiasm is infectious, and you know, if the manager or the people that own the hotel are enthusiastic, it makes all the staff feel enthusiastic, and you know, it gets everyone onto a high, doesn't it? So yeah, but attention to detail. Address people by their name if you can remember it, and just the little things that make all the difference.
Yeah, I think you've hit on a key point there with groups in mind in particular, because it's definitely something that I hear a lot, that the best thing you can do for a group is to treat them like individuals instead of just one big party and just some big amalgam. I think that individual treatment does go a really, really long way with a group visit. So yeah, great point. Just on the subject of hotels, I thought I'd come to Robert Ramsey next and ask, what do you look for when contracting hotels? So more from the kind of planning and booking side of it. What is it from hotels that you're really looking for?
Well, that's an interesting question. There's so many things we look for when we're contracting hotels. I mean, you know, there's Albatross brand standards. Do they do porterage, choice of menu, things like that? But they're all very tick box. But actually, the main thing I look for when I'm contracting hotels, I mean, it was exactly what Robert said there, is gauging the attitude of the representative I meet towards the coach industry. That's the most important thing. So Scotland's quite it's an unfortunate position in that the person you're dealing with when you're contracting is generally the owner, the manager, or at the very least the reception, the person in charge of making bookings. Because they're independent hotels, that definitely isn't the case down south, where you could be chatting to a director of sales who's a million times removed from the actual day-to-day operations. And you can find out from chatting to that representative, you can get a good feeling about is their attitude towards the coach industry just like a filler for those quiet times of the weeks, or are they going to see them as 40 guests, individual guests that could actually fill their hotel? And that very, from working in hospitality for years, I know that attitude filters down to the staff, to the team, so that if the manager and the owner really are keen for that market, that will filter right down to the serving staff, to the reception staff, and you may get then you get, like Robert said, people talking for the guests by their names rather than referring to them as the group, that kind of thing. That's probably the most important thing when contracting for me, but also other things like, that, as I alluded to before, like the dining. Are they going to be dining on smaller tables of 2s and 4s, or are they going to be put into a function room on big tables of like 8 or 10, that kind of thing? Also, the coach welcome, I think, is a really important thing. Is how the guests are actually greeted. As soon as you ask, well, how are you going to welcome the group? If people say, oh, well, we're going to stick the keys on the reception desk, things like that. Whereas if they instantly say, well, I'm going to go in the coach and do the high exits to the left and right and all that, you never get problems from those hotels, ever. It's there just seems that there's definitely something in it.
Yeah, very interesting. All singing from the same hymn sheet today, looks like it. And yeah, is it different for attractions and activities? Do you look for slightly different things, or would you say it's that same welcome is the #1 priority? I mean, we haven't spoken about parking yet. I know coach parking does tend to be a buzzword as well, but as we all know, it goes above and beyond that.
Yeah, it does go. That's almost secondary kind of thing. It is incredibly important, but that. If a hotel doesn't have coach parking or no access for the coaches, it isn't even considered, if that makes sense. So it gets discounted almost at the first hurdle. But yeah, obviously the majority of coach friendly hotels will have spaces on site or behind the hotel or such like. Similar with attractions, I think attractions are more of a case. The welcome's very important. Even tours that aren't guided, attractions that don't have guided tours, if there can be someone at the attraction to welcome the guests and welcome to our attraction, and then they're left to their own devices afterwards, I think that's vitally important.
Great, thanks. And I've got, we're just coming to the end of my questions now, so we should have time for some of the audience questions at the end. So do pop them in the chat box if you've got anything that you'd like to ask the panelists. But a question for Peter and Ian. I'll go with Peter first. What do you see as the biggest benefit to the business as a result of working with the coach market?
With the domestic coach market, or just
with the domestic coach market?
Yeah, sure. Well, when I first joined the trust back in my blushing early 20s, people were quite reluctant to work with the domestic market at the trust, and that's because of who we are. We have a membership, or a membership organization, so it was always seen as a smarter hustle to try and work on the domestic market from a membership point of view and just focus on trade when it comes to the international market. But since then we've changed. Since COVID, we very much changed, and I think part of that is the fact that I think there's a lot to be said, almost to go back to what Martin was saying about communication and just the professionalization of that, and having one person you can talk to who's coordinating potentially dozens of guests to your properties. Make sure that they have the best time, that they visit multiple properties potentially on an itinerary, and so you've got the volume to start with, and then you have secondary spend as well, because when people are on their holidays, maybe they want to spend more time in the cafe, on the gift shop, and then yeah, maybe then they want to get a membership if they really like your property. But first of all, it's about the experience, understanding that people at home like holidays too. They don't have to be a member of the trust to enjoy our attractions. So that's it. I'd say it's the obvious things like volume and spend, but also the fact that the whole infrastructure of the domestic travel market gives you someone to talk to and a chance to coordinate more groups. Great.
And Ian, same question to you. What's the biggest benefit of working with the domestic coach market?
I think that what we've found is that basically you build up a relationship of trust, and the thing that I always think that it's good that the the impression that we gave, it's not an impression, that they can always lift the phone, and if there's a problem, and inevitably there are problems, then there's somebody here that can answer that question, and that's the basic of the relationships that we have with coach operators. That it's not just a couple of girls in the travel trade section. If they want to speak to somebody to get an answer, then basically they talk to me.
And you see that trust means that they're like reliable clients who'll book again and again as a result of that relationship building.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, thank you, Ian. And final question for the operators on our panel. Just a nice top tip right at the end. What can a supplier do to make your lives easier? I'll start with Martin first.
I'm going to sound like a broken record here, to be honest. I'm going to revert to my previous response of communication. I think consistent and regular contact between coach, supplier, attraction and hotel really does make a difference. It kind of makes the whole experience feel like one package, because that's really what we're trying to achieve here. Our business, like many coach companies, they're old-fashioned. They're old-fashioned in the sense that they've got a lot of strong family values, and part of that means that we live and die by a firm belief in relationships, and those having to work well both ways, not just for yourself, because we look on any issues if we're on a trip, not just did we get the coach right and forget about the attraction or the hotel and say, well, you know what that hotel's like, or that attraction's always like that. We kind of look on it as a personal failure ourselves if there's been any element of that trip not went well. And the best way to ensure that you minimise that is by regular contact, speaking to each other. Because if there is an issue, I come away from that thinking, did I speak to the right person? Did I get the right information from them? And obviously, I worked in hospitality as well in my days gone by, and I've seen it from that perspective as well. So I know they'll be asking themselves the same kind of questions. So it's not just simply about getting the coach element right and pinning the blame elsewhere. Now more than ever, the community of tourism really has to kind of come together to make sure that the products that we're offering do have that one product feel about it, that whomever they're booking it with, that it feels seamless from start to finish. And really, we need to promote the community as loudly and as proudly as we can moving forward, is where I would leave that.
Great, thanks, Martin. Great one. And Robert Shaw, to you next. What can suppliers do to make your lives easier? Oh, I think you might be on mute, Robert.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, perfect. Thanks.
No, but I say, yeah, just going on from what Martin was saying, I think communication is absolutely vital. But going on from that as well, it's important that suppliers are flexible with their terms and conditions. Really, it's not easy out there, is it? We've all got to accept that, and it's no good relying on a set of booking conditions that were drawn up in the good old days. And you know, it's important that hoteliers in particular recognise that a group is not like a wedding booking. You know, we're not confident that the actual numbers that we're booking are going to travel. So you know, don't take it as a given that when we book for 48 people, for example, 48 people are all going to arrive. So it's important to understand the market that we're in. It is different, and everybody has to be flexible to understand that. And the other appeal I would make is to look after the coach driver. I know this is basic stuff really, but you know, the coach driver is probably one of the most important people involved in our industry. He's often the only human contact that our company has with the clients. And the one thing that always comes up on questionnaires is the coach driver. You know, he was wonderful or he wasn't. They can make or break a tour. So it's essential that you give him a nice room sometimes. Don't stick him in the worst single room you've got at the back of the hotel next to the lift, because you know, he's got to get up the next morning and drive, you know, in the good old days, over 40 people around. So please treat him with some respect. You know, that's important. And the other thing I would say, of course, is the obvious thing. Just share any social media experiences you've got. I mean, that's the way the world seems to be working now. So you know, link us into anything that you're doing, and make sure that we'll share that, and that the message is getting out there from all of us as a team rather than just as individual businesses.
Yeah, it's a great point, and yeah, one that Martin touched on as well. It's definitely about supporting each other and shouting about each other, and making sure that your clients are also getting the messages direct from the suppliers about the amazing experience they can expect. So yeah, great. And last but not least, Robert Ramsey, what can someone do to make your life easier?
I'd say the number one thing hoteliers can do to make my life easier would be just to check in on the guests during their stay, to inquire after their holiday, see how things are going, particularly at meal times. I think that's a great time to do it. I mean, Albatross are fairly fortunate. We don't get many complaints at all, but when we do, and the few times we do, more often than not, it's one person or a couple have had a bad experience and they haven't felt comfortable going to the driver, they haven't gone to the reception staff, the duty manager, they've kind of bottled it up. And over the course of the week, there's been other things that have compounded it. They've gone home and written a letter, and then it's up to the coach operator and ourselves to liaise with the hotel to find a solution. More often than not, if the grievances have been aired at the time, they could have been resolved quite easily, sort of thing. But it's also, it comes down to viewing the coach guests not as a group but as individual guests. It's just a natural thing. How's your holiday? They're on holiday after all.
Yeah.
The other thing that suppliers could do is, and they already do a fantastic job of this, is just the quality of the meals. Quality of meals and food service. I think that it's by far and away the most important part of the coach guests' experience. And you know, if the hotel owner management ensure that that's top quality, it will pick over so many cracks.
I'm sure that would extend. Sorry, Robert, on you go.
Come in there and say also it's important that, as we're saying about hotels treating our guests as individuals, a prime example of that is not to put them in a conference room for their breakfast. I mean, that's a massive source of complaint because they feel like they're second-class citizens, really. So, and also don't try to give them the meal times that nobody else wants, like 5:45 in the morning or 10:30 for breakfast. You know, be realistic. Just because you've got a group of people there, you can't treat them like that. Just be realistic in what you're doing to them.
And I'm sure that would extend to visitor attractions or any lunch stops as well, because I mean, that meal stop in the middle of the day can make or break the rest of the afternoon for the tour, whether you've got happy passengers or grumpy passengers. So quality lunch definitely would go a long way, I would say, as well. Great, so thank you very much for your contributions. I think that was really insightful, and I am going to just have a look at the questions that have come in from the audience and pose just a couple more while we've got a few more minutes. So first question that we've got here, I think this is in reference to Martin's answer earlier, but perhaps the Roberts could also chip in as well. A question on what safety measures are in place for guides on coaches. So if there's a step-on guide, how are you handling that in COVID times?
Well, I think similarly, they'll benefit from the other measures that are in place, not only for the driver but for the passengers. Instead of using the guide seat, we're using the window seat in the first row, and not the aisle seat in the first row, which gives them the distance between the driver. Bearing in mind the driver also has this screen there, and then obviously we'd be protecting that 1 metre distance between the guide and anybody else. One issue for guiding naturally is for transmission is the microphone, and that really can only be eradicated by the guides bringing their own, and the vehicles having a port at the front, a USB port. We've fitted USB ports to the front of yours, and we actually have some. We don't expect a great number of guided tours, I must say, at this point in time. So we actually have a stock of microphones. That's too expensive long term for the coach company to continue to provide a new microphone per guide. You may find that on the back of this that a more sustainable way to approach that would be the guides would appear with their own microphones to do that. But feeling that, as I say, they'll enjoy, is maybe not the right word, but they'll enjoy the benefits of the increased protections that we've got on board with the purifiers and the mask wearing and what have you.
Yeah, great. And anything to add there, Robert, Ramsey or Shaw? Sorry, I should really be treating you like individuals. I shouldn't be treating you like a group of Roberts. I'm not learning lessons. Okie doke. Moving on, we've got another question regarding the lines of communication. So how can a supplier reach the coach operator directly and not just a booking agent or department? So yeah, maybe most relevant for Robert Ramsey to touch on first as an intermediary, but yeah, maybe Martin and Robert Shaw can chip in and say, yeah, how the coach operator communicates with the supplier and who the relevant parties are in that communication.
I think it all depends on who's making the booking. I mean, if Albatross are making the booking, regardless, our clients are the coach operators, but we would require all communication to come to us, and we'll liaise that to the coach operators. We wouldn't want a hotel going direct to our clients if we are the ones that made the bookings. However, if the coach operators made a booking direct with the hotel, then naturally they will liaise direct the coach operator. I think that's the response.
Yeah, and how does that work on arrival then, Robert? Because you were talking about the good welcome and how to arrange that welcome. Is that something that you like to arrange with the hotel directly? Yeah, pre-arrival for the coach operator, so that everything's already in place without the need for extra touch points.
Absolutely. I mean, we're in constant contact with the suppliers and the clients, so there's a constant stream. We're just acting as the conduit, if you like, for that information. So yeah, the welcomes, dinner times, breakfast times, and things like that, that will all be organised, but we are the voice of our clients, if you like.
Yeah, great. Anything to add, Martin or Robert?
It very much depends on the client, and a client like Albatross would obviously deal with it. Other clients would probably provide you with the hotel information, and you would then have that direct link. They would maybe want you to make the contact on the day of arrival and such like. Yeah. So generally, I've not had too much of an issue with being able to be able to have that communication, because either the client is consistently on it, or you've got the details yourself.
Yeah, I think it's important. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think it's important to actually establish a relationship sometimes with an individual within an organisation, and to try to speak to the same individual constantly, if that's at all possible. Because don't just ring the office up and ask for numbers, etc. It's important to talk to someone who's provided you with the same information in the past. So I think that's important. But I mean, we're all used to doing this. We've been doing it a long time. So, just trust us sometimes. And particularly in the case of Albatross, they're a very professional organisation, and, they do know what they're doing. So, just trust everybody. I think we've got to establish that, really.
Great, thank you. Just having a little look at some of the other questions. I'm struggling to read them. Sorry, apologies for the lag. Here we go. So what level of business would you say you place in the cities such as Glasgow versus areas outside of cities? So are gateway types of itineraries of interest where a group would have a base to explore, or is it more of that touring itinerary, like one night visits that seem to be more popular? Perhaps, yeah, most relevant for Robert, Ramsey, Shaw, or Martin from like the organisational side of the operator's itinerary. Is it city bases that are more popular, or is it that kind of touring into the regions that is coming out more strongly?
Can I come in here? I think people like to stay in the same hotel for say 4 nights or whatever. They don't want to be constantly packing and unpacking their bags. I mean, I'm talking about the domestic market here. The incoming market is completely different. they seem to accept that and seem to accept they're just going to have one night here and one night there and travel around. But the domestic market, people, I think people just like to get to a hotel, unpack, put all the stuff in the wardrobe, and then go on the excursions, etc. A little bit. That's one of the attractions of a cruise, isn't it? So, you know, people like to do the same thing, and I think coaching is very similar to that. Like I say, the incoming market is totally different animal. People sort of will accept that and will move about freely to do it. You can tell that by the size of the suitcases they bring with them, by the way. So, you know, that's just a thought.
No, I would agree with Robert's commentary on that. You know, guests are looking to spend time in the one location and enjoy the excursions. And then if that hotel's in a particularly good location, then they can enjoy what's round about that of an evening.
Just from a price perspective, you alluded to it earlier on, the city centres have traditionally priced themselves out of the market almost. So it's much more viable for a coach operator, I think, to base themselves slightly outside Edinburgh and do day trips in, similarly with Glasgow, than actually stay in the city centre.
Great, thank you. And I'll just ask one more question, I think, just trying to pull one out. We've had some specific questions from agri-tourism operators. So is there anything from a group perspective that you think could be used in those types of businesses? So, for example, morning coffee, afternoon coffee, or high tea. Is that something that a farm tourism business should be thinking about offering?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. I think they should be offering that because it provides an important break for the coach. At the end of the day, people like getting off the coach. You know, they've been on the coach, usually travelled a long way to get to Scotland. So anything we can do to get them off the coach is a huge advantage. And it doubles up as a toilet break as well, doesn't it? So, you know, there's that sort of thing to consider as well. But I would definitely think of anything that's different because people remember those unique experiences, don't they? You know, it's just, you know, they say, well, what do you remember about attraction? Well, the scones were pretty good. And that's, you know, it's kind of, it's important to actually bear that in mind, really. And people just enjoy doing different things when they go away, don't they? So a high tea or something is essential. And sometimes it sells a tour. It's a hat to hang something on, isn't it? It's a USP, if you like. So yeah, do it. You know, it works. Yeah. And if you do it right, you can make money out of it. I mean, a few sandwiches don't cost a lot of money, but you can certainly charge a bit for them, can't you?
Yeah, I think that ties into what you were saying earlier, Robert, about yeah, putting together a package, like an easily packageable experience, is definitely a unique selling point that will stand out more. Would you agree with that?
Sorry, you good there? Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's a given. Definitely do that. Do things like that. Yeah. Great.
Well, I would like to thank you all very, very much for joining us today for the webinar in the audience, and thank you so much to each of our panellists for sparing an hour out of their very busy days to come and talk to us about the UK coach market. I hope you've all learned a lot. I'll take a look at the remaining questions in the question box and see if I can do some direct answers to some of the audience for some of those urgent questions. And as I say, the session has been recorded, so it'll be shared with the registrants for the webinar later on, and then you feel free to share it with any of your staff as well who you think would benefit from seeing it. So thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Bye.